Welcome to The Blast Zone, the podcast where we dig up the bombs that shook Hollywood and try to find out why they went up in flames. This week, originally titled Circular Dances, Circular Fights, this is Heaven's Gate. Welcome to The Blast Zone.
Welcome to The Blast Zone.
We are not a podcast about bad movies. We are a podcast about movies that did badly.
That's right.
I am Jon Drake, in-house film critic of my Letterboxd account.
And I'm Ian Dukes. I'm a person with thoughts and feelings, and some of them are about movies.
Movies like Heaven's Gate. But before we get into that, Ian, some big news. We are qualified for syndication.
Wow.
Yeah, we can get those residuals now. We got 100 episodes.
Do they have my address for the checks? Because I do not want to miss the big money rolling in.
No, I just told them to send it all to me.
Oh.
And that I would divide it up as I see fit.
Okay.
I thought that was fair.
You got my Venmo, right?
No, I don't plan on getting it. No, this is a big deal. 100th episode.
Yes, congratulations. It's amazing.
Are you congratulating me or the listeners or just everyone?
Just everybody within the sound of my voice. Thank you and congratulations. It's pretty big.
Yeah.
I thought we'd get to 100.
I know, it's exciting. Feels monumental, as it should, because it is a monumental number of episodes. But we can't just spend all day patting ourselves on the back talking about how great it is that we've made it this far, because we have a show to record.
We do.
So what did you watch this week, Ian? I know you, full disclosure, a little peek behind the curtain. You were like, man, I didn't watch a lot of shit this week, which is usually my line.
Well, it's funny. I watched a lot of shit, but I didn't watch a lot of movies. So I'm starting a new segment of the show called Bringing Back Barry. I'm bringing Barry back. You brought Barry on our last episode, and I was like, oh yeah, I used to love that show. And so I sat down with the old HBO or the Max, as the kids call it, and I watched 2.5 seasons, and I'm all caught up, and that was kind of all I watched. So I'm like, oh, that's the only thing I can talk about. But there is one thing that I did want to call out about the show. You described it admirably last week in an inspiring way, but there's something really cool that struck me. And there's these nested layers of meaning in the show that I found really enjoyable. One of the main themes is Sally's story. She goes back and forth on how to deal with her trauma. She's alternately very truthful about it, and then other times succumbing to pressure to alter the truth and paint her story as something more heroic or Hollywoodized. And then as I was watching that, I was like, Bill Hader and the co-creator Alex Berg are like wrestling with the same thing, because they're trying to provide this entertaining action comedy show and a plot that moves forward at an exciting pace, which it does. They're really good at that. But they made this hero, and his truth is so painful and fucked up. I found myself constantly going, oh, this can't go on. Like, how does this character continue to exist?
Right.
Given what just happened. And that happens every couple of episodes. You're like, no, this is the end. He can't go on. And so it's fun to see them try to solve that problem. The story does go on. They make it go on in a really fun way, but they also really try to keep true to the character and not Hollywoodize things too much. And it really works. And I'm excited to see how it wraps up, because they're bound to do something pretty bold and challenging at the end of this.
Yeah, I'm certain the show's going to have a bombastic ending. One thing interesting about the show that touches on the points you just made is that it treats the emotional repercussions of what happens in the show very realistically, while treating the real world repercussions from like a legal point of view or like a newsworthy point of view in a very stylized, pulpy, almost altered reality way. Like,
yeah,
you know, like the rules of that world aren't exactly the rules of ours, but the things that you do in them still impact you the way they do in our world.
Yeah, like you can't just go murder drug gangs. It's like all easy and kind of nothing really happens. No one follows up on it.
Yeah.
But stuff like that happens. But then you're right. Then the suffering of the characters because of the things that happen is really intense, especially in the last 2 seasons. There's so many close-ups, really tight close-ups, and the characters are just sitting there in anguish and not even saying much. And they really let you sit in it.
Yeah, it was always a dark comedy, but I feel like it's leaning much more into a dramedy with dark comedy elements.
Yeah.
Or not even a drama, just like a meditation on suffering. Like it's gotten pretty bleak for Barry.
You know it's bad when NoHo Hank is actually suffering real emotion on screen. You're like, oh, we've taken a turn. Yeah. The comic relief is now fucking sad as shit.
I don't want to see my boy upset, but no, I'm enjoying the final season. I'm all caught up as well. Nice. Sunday nights are just jam-packed between Succession and Yellow Jackets and Barry. But we've been talking a lot about twin movies.
That's right.
So for my show, or spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about a show, not a movie. movie
Okay.
because I also did not watch any movies this week, though I'm excited to finally check out Dungeons and Dragons because it's available now on streaming.
Nice. Yes.
But I decided to check out Love and Death, which is a new Max original miniseries from David E. Kelly, who I'm a fan of. I enjoyed Boston Public, was like a formative show for me, one of the shows I watched. I think that predated like prestige TV by and large, but it felt like it was in that realm. And then Big Little Lies was another one I just watched. I almost brought that because...
Oh, that's great. Did you like it?
Yeah.
I realized I loved David Kelly when I saw that show. And I'm like, fuck, this guy's good.
Yeah, I watched season 1 and part of season 2. I'm going to try to finish season 2, but I understand season 1 is vastly superior and I really loved it. I thought the performances were fantastic. And it's based on a book that wraps up where season 1 wraps up. So I think that's usually a sign that the quality is going to dip somewhat in season 2.
Hard to top. It's such a big mystery story that kind of concludes. You're like, you're going to do another mystery in season 2? Good luck.
Yeah. The Leftovers improved when it left the book behind, but that's the rare exception.
Right. Yeah. That's special.
But so this miniseries, listen to this cast. It's got Elizabeth Olsen and Jesse Plemons are the 2 leads.
Nice.
That's a powerhouse duo right there. You've got Kristen Ritter, Tom Pelphrey, really good actors in it. It's based on a true story about a woman named Candy Montgomery who was accused of murdering her friend Betty with an axe in 1980 in Texas over an affair Candy had with Betty's husband, Alan, who was the Jesse Plemons character. Not sure how many episodes there are going to be eventually, but I watched the first 1.5 episodes and it's clearly well made, but it's just like, it's lacking some soul or something. I don't know. It's like the motivation for the affair is very thin and it almost feels by design to bring up another Jesse Plemons performance that I loved when he was married to Kirsten Dunst's character in Fargo season 2. She just kind of has a very floaty explanation for all her actions in that season of television. And I kind of feel like they're working from that archetype for the Candy Montgomery character in this show as well. But the whole twin thing is to say that Hulu made a miniseries called Candy just last year, almost a year ago to the day that we're recording this, starring Jessica Biel, Melanie Linsky, like Pablo Schreiber, another great cast.
Yeah.
And that one was apparently better received than Love and Death is. So I'm like, now do I bail on Love and Death and go check out Candy or what?
That's a tough one. I remember the poster image from that of Jessica Biel's face with some blood on it, maybe?
Yeah, she does have some blood. I'm looking at the poster right now.
That's wild. I didn't connect that, the twin series.
This might be my mistake, but when you see like a close-up of Jessica Biel's face on the poster, like Elizabeth Olsen is an A-lister. Jesse Plemons is an A-lister. Like I don't really consider Jessica Biel an A-list actor anymore. So I was like, I'm going to check out the David E. Kelly, Elizabeth Olsen, Jesse Plemons one, of course.
Yeah.
But maybe that was a mistake.
You wouldn't expect either one to let you down. But yeah, it does beg the question, can you watch 2 series on the same true crime story?
Certainly not like in such close proximity. That just feels like it'd be overkill.
Yeah.
Heaven's Gate, Ian, this is the big one. Why don't you tell me what you remember about this movie when it came out? I'm sure it wasn't a movie like you sought out in theaters because you were still quite young. And also it was not in many theaters for very long.
No, but I do remember trying to watch it long ago, probably in my late teens, early 20s, getting it from the video rental store. And I'm trying to piece this together. I think I just fell asleep and missed most of it. Had a nice 3.5 hour
You fell
nap.
asleep during Heaven's Gate?
Like the only images that stuck in my mind from trying to watch this movie were from the final battle scene. That was my memory of it. Then this week I watched the movie and I'm like, oh, the thing I woke up for was the semi-final battle. That wasn't the final battle. I think I fell back asleep for the final battle. Although maybe there's like a vague image of the dynamite. So both these sequences of shooting, shouting, and explosions may have rousted me from my slumber, but kind of all that stuck with me.
Interesting. When you went to go rent it from the video store, was it like in a featured display? Was it still a movie people talked about a lot? Were your friends like, I want to check out Heaven's Gate? Or was it just a curiosity that you'd heard of, wanted to check it out?
Yeah, I think it was already a curiosity, like, this is a famous bomb, but maybe it's cool because it's a Western. And I've never been the biggest Western guy, but I was enough into it. The Man with No Name, Clint Eastwood stuff is definitely an influential part of the movies of my youth. So I was like ready to give it a chance, but I just kind of put me out.
You were not alone. That seems to be the consensus with many people's first attempt at watching it. Do you want me to get into the making of the movie a little bit? Because this is going to be a doozy of a monologue.
Yeah, get a sip of Gatorade and let's hear how this thing happened.
This is it, the big one, Heaven's Gate, one of the most famous failures in Hollywood history. Michael Cimino was an Italian-American kid from Westbury, New York, that's Long Island, for our listeners unfamiliar, who got his start in showbiz as a sought-after commercial director in New York. But in 1971, he moved to Los Angeles to become a screenwriter. He co-wrote sci-fi film Silent Running, and then the Dirty Harry sequel Magnum Force, which he co-wrote with John Milius. The two reportedly did not get along. He would work with Eastwood again on his directorial debut, which he also wrote, called Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. The movie was a hit, and it's also how Cimino met Jeff Bridges, who earned a Best Supporting Actor nod for his work in the movie. He'd play in several projects that got into various stages of development, but failed to materialize before settling on his next feature, which he would co-write, co-produce, and direct, the Vietnam drama The Deer Hunter. The Deer Hunter was a phenomenon, getting rave reviews and making money, eventually earning Cimino Oscars for Best Picture and Best Director.
I just hope his new fame didn't come with some unwelcome consequences.
But Cimino's new fame came with some unwelcome consequences. As journalists doing pieces on him in the film began to dig into his past, they found quite a bit of contradictory information from Cimino himself. He'd embellished or outright lied about his upbringing, education, family, age, and even height, but he'd get into real trouble for implying that The Deer Hunter, one of the most horrific depictions of the consequences of war on the men who fight, was based on his own experiences while, quote, attached to a Green Beret medical unit, unquote, during the Tet Offensive in 1968. The New York Times, who he gave the quote to, tried to corroborate it and could not, so they contacted Universal Studios. Universal Studios executives made the super wise decision to fabricate evidence supporting Cimino's claim, which was easily sniffed out. Eventually, it was revealed that Cimino had only spent 6 months in active service while a student at Yale in 1962, and had been as a reservist who was never posted to Vietnam.
Good morning, New Haven.
This scandal, combined with what was viewed as a racially insensitive depiction of the Viet Cong
In 1978,
the movie going over budget and over schedule, and rumors of his clashing with several people on set and with studio executives constantly, was starting to give Cimino an unsavory reputation around Hollywood. But you couldn't argue with the results, and Cimino was essentially given a blank check to make his next project, which would be based on Wyoming's 1892 Johnson County War between land barons and European immigrants. This clash was also the inspiration for Shane and the Virginian. Cimino fictionalized large portions of the story despite naming several characters after real key figures from the era. He had originally submitted a script for the film, then called the Johnson County War, in 1971, but the project didn't make it out of planning. Now named Heaven's Gate, Cimino was given $11.6 million by United Artists to make his dream movie and was given full oversight over production.
he was so overjoyed to have oversight over production, he immediately went over budget.
Location scouting was an odyssey, with over 20,000 miles of land being searched and surveyed for use in the film. Glacier National Park near Kalispell, Montana, was eventually decided on to be the setting for Casper, Wyoming, the town at the center of the conflict. Principal photography began on April 16, 1979, with an extremely ambitious December 14, 1979 release date planned, but as it was famously said by an on-set insider, by the 6th day of filming, the picture was already 5 days behind schedule.
And fucked 7 ways to Sunday.
Cimino's attention to detail and frankly absurd demands had slowed progress to a snail's pace. He requested 50 takes of some scenes. He waited hours for a cloud he'd like to float into frame. In maybe the most egregious example of his eccentricity, a street that had been built to his specs, quote, didn't look right, and so he required the on-set construction crew to tear the set down and move each side back 3 feet. The set construction boss had the excellent idea to just tear one side down and move it back 6 feet, but Cimino was not having that shit.
Listen, I want these streets pushed back, and I don't want any pushback.
John Hurt had so much free time because of the slow production, he made The Elephant Man with David Lynch while waiting around. Cimino shot 1.3 million feet of footage. That's 220 hours. United Artists even considered firing Cimino and replacing him with Norman Jewison. By the time shooting finally finished in March 1980, 4 months after it was supposed to be released, it had cost the studio $30 million, nearly 3 times its original budget. Cimino went about editing the movie with William H. Reynolds, and he lorded over it with his usual fervor. He did not allow studio executives into the editing room until his cut was completed, and he finally previewed a work print for studio execs that ran nearly 5.5 hours. He acknowledged this was too long, though, and he said his final cut would be about 15 minutes shorter.
I'll be here all week, folks, trying to watch the rest of the movie.
Now United Artists really wanted to fire him, but Cimino agreed to cut it down further, eventually turning in a 3-hour and 39-minute version. Now set for release in November of 1980, nearly a year after the original release date, the movie was ready and United Artists put their weight behind it. The studio spent $1.5 million on the marketing for the 3 weeks leading up to the premiere, and it was held on November 19th, 1980 in New York City, but it was evident immediately that the movie was in trouble. During intermission, because that's right, this movie needed an intermission, Cimino asked why nobody was drinking the champagne. His publicists told him it was because they all hated the movie.
Oh, so they were drinking the haterade.
The film stayed in select theaters for only a week, selling very few few tickets and racking up absolutely brutal reviews. Vincent Canby from the New York Times called it something quite rare in movies these days, an unqualified disaster. And Roger Ebert from the Chicago Sun-Times called it one of the ugliest movies he'd ever seen. Unsure what to do with their now $44 million albatross, United Artists told Cimino to cut it down again, eventually ending up with a 2-hour and 29-minute version. This version was released on April 24th, 1981 in 810 theaters and closed just 2 weeks later, making $3.5 million total against its eventual $44 million budget. The film's utter failure grounded Hollywood's auteur movement, causing the studios to take a majority of control back from directors. Widespread accusations of animal abuse also plagued the movie, causing new guidelines for animal usage in filmed media to be implemented by the Screen Actors Guild and the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, allowing the American Humane Society to monitor the film sets. The film also contributed to Transamerica Corporation, who owned United Artists, to sell the studio to Kirk Kerkorian, the owner of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Many solely blame the movie for United Artists' collapse, but other factors were in play also. Cimino's career obviously suffered as well, not directing another movie until 1985, when his Year of the Dragon was released and bombed critically and commercially. He never had another successful movie, writing a novel that got published in a bunch of movies that never got made, and he passed away in July of 2016. He was comforted late in his life by a massive critical reevaluation of Heaven's Gate, as a 216-minute cut that was re-released in 2012 at the 69th Venice Film Festival led to more attention and screenings, helping new audiences discover it. Audiences are split on it now, but it lives on as both a cautionary tale and a crowning achievement in American cinema.
I guess you can have it both ways. We should talk about the cuts because it's interesting. According to what you're telling us, the critics hated one version and the public hated a different version, like a pretty different version, an hour shorter.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder what we saw. A lot of the complaints about this movie are about its length, its pace, the time it wastes doing things that you don't really know what it's doing.
Spoiler alert from me as well. Those will be my central complaints.
There's a lot that I didn't care for about it, but there's a lot of good stuff in here. So the critics seeing the full version, I don't actually totally understand why they thought it was so ugly and so horrid and so totally vapid, because it's got too much in there, but it does have most of a very normal epic Western in it.
So in my position as a resident Cimino expert, I'm joking, of course, I'm not a Cimino expert, but I did recently finish his biography. So there was some more detail given about what some of the backlash was specifically regarding. And a lot of critics did complain that the original cut was long and boring, meandering, but a lot of the complaints were also that the story was hard to follow because the dialogue was mixed too low. The story was hard to follow because some scenes were underlit or overlit and you couldn't necessarily make out the details you needed to understand what was happening. And a lot of that was corrected. The version we watched is the 2012 version that was most recently released.
Okay.
So a lot of the work done on that cut wasn't just editing, it was also restoration and trying to fix some of those more technical mistakes present in the original.
Okay, that makes sense. So if this movie was harder to see and hear than the version that we saw, then I have total sympathy with people being like, what the fuck? Because it's pretty hard. And you know what? None of them had subtitles we can flick on now when you're like, what did John Hurt just spend 7 minutes rhyming about?
Subtitles didn't really help with that, though.
That particular scene, it didn't. But there are ones when you're like, okay, this is an actual plot detail. I need to know that the Richard Mazer with a thick Irish accent as the station master just told some actual crucial plot detail that tells us what's about to happen in the movie.
Yeah, the first time I watched this movie, I was just like along for the ride, gonna vibe with it. And yeah, you have no idea what's going on until you got to turn your volume up to just a completely unreasonable level so that if the next scene starts with the train whistle or something, it's like, oh, fuck.
You're fucked.
Like that's what I was at when I was rewatching because I was like, all right, I have to actually understand. I understand what's happening in this movie and I kind of understand why, but I don't understand why certain characters are acting in the way they are.
Yeah.
Or like why this guy's on this side and why this guy's on another. So I was like, I really got to pay attention now. And yeah, it was a chore. It was a chore to follow because like, we'll get into some of the narrative choices that make it hard to follow. But yeah, there were still some glaring technical issues, particularly with the sound mixing that made it difficult.
The sound mixing combined with the acting choices or the choices of how these characters behave, it compounds and it makes the problem worse. And then the choices that Cimino made in the edit and just the beats of the story, it really makes you work. But I would like to say for people who haven't seen it, if you just heard the basic pitch of what this movie is, it's actually perfectly serviceable and perhaps exciting Western. Western. Here's my pitch of it. Small town cop in the Old West discovers a plot by a group of rich and powerful ranchers, and he must fight against all odds to stop a great injustice from occurring. So it's got these bones of
That is a great elevator pitch for an exciting Western, and wouldn't you know, because that's the same pitch as Shane.
Yeah.
So
That's
probably one of the most revered Westerns of all time.
Yeah, that's funny. I saw when you said that there are these two other famous movies, with neither of which I have seen, even though that they may be classics. So I'm kind of raw and uneducated coming into this movie and trying to make my best analysis of it just based on the facts that I have at hand. But that's pretty telling that you can make one of the most classic and beloved Westerns off the same story, because it's a good story.
Yeah.
But the hero in this one is a piece of shit. I don't know if he's a piece of shit in Shane.
Used to be.
Slick back hair.
He kind of has slick back hair.
He does occasionally.
White horse and carriage, fully glass log cabin, live for New Year's Eve. But he's not the best. He's kind of filling an archetype, though, for Western heroes, even the kind of past his prime, drunken gunslinger.
When you say that, that makes sense. I do recognize that is a thing, and there are sympathetic versions of that character, and they do push you. I guess that's the point of having the drunk sheriff who's jaded and has to be brought around to revitalize his idealism to stand up for justice. That's all good, but they make you work so hard to even figure out that's what this guy is. You don't even know he's a sheriff. I don't know if he's a sheriff. He might be a marshal. I don't know what he's technically.
No, he's a sheriff. He's the Johnson County sheriff.
Is he the sheriff? Okay.
But yeah, they don't do a good job of he never wears a star. He never introduced himself as sheriff.
I think he does put on the star, but it's too late. I'm like, this guy's a piece of shit. He's a drunk asshole. He's mumbling. I can't tell what the hell he's about. And then it's, he's starting to act like a cop. Why is he picking up clues and following a trail? No, he's a fucking sheriff. Okay. Could have told me that.
I mean, they probably did, but you couldn't hear it over a background dog barking or something.
Train whistles blowing. And
just all that background noise needs to be heavy in the mix. All right. Want to start going through the story beat by beat so we can see maybe where the movie triumphs and where it fails?
Sure. Here we go. It's 1890, and former Harvard graduate Jim Averill, played by Kristofferson, is the sheriff of Johnson County in rural Wyoming. Averill has been away for a while. When he arrives back in Wyoming, he tries to figure out what's been going on. Lots of European immigrants have been settling in the area, and the wealthy cattle barons of the Wyoming Stock Growers Association don't like it. Based on trumped-up accusations of anarchism and cattle rustling by the immigrants, the cattlemen have gotten the governor's permission to hire an army of mercenaries to execute everyone on a death list containing the names of 125 local men and women. Averill learns this news from his old college buddy Billy Irvine, played by John Hurt, who is the lone dissenting member of the Cattlemen's Association. And then Averill exchanges harsh words and blows with the stock growers chairman, Frank Canton, played by Sam Waterston.
So weird seeing a young Sam Waterston. If you only know him as his elder statesman actor now, he's got a very specific way of speaking and acting. He hadn't quite taken on at the point of this movie, so it feels like watching Sam Waterston do a very long impression of somebody else.
Yeah, I got that same feeling. Is that how he really talks? Where's the Jimmy Stewart affectation that he does as a Law and Order man later?
Also a newsroom man. And I never watched Law and Order. I know him mainly from the newsroom, which is embarrassing to admit that I watched the newsroom, but damn it, I like walking and talking.
And he's good. Definitely a very serviceable villain in this movie.
Oh yeah, he's a real shithale.
As much as you might like Sam Waterston, he's played much more appealing character since, but right away in this one, this guy sucks. Yeah. He's evil. It's a strong villain.
In typical fashion, though, I jumped ahead. We should start at the beginning. Let's talk about this Harvard graduation scene. Do you know how old Kris Kristofferson was when they filmed this scene?
I thought he was maybe 43, 44?
43. He was 44 when the movie was released.
Okay.
Which is hilarious to me because, maybe he's a super senior, but none of these dudes look like college seniors, which maybe would have been worse if they had thrown in a bunch of college seniors next to Kris Kristofferson and William Hurt, who was 40 at the time. So they had to make them all look old as shit.
So this is the first big problem with the movie, right? Because it's why are we at Harvard? This is the first thing you see.
I can tell you that this entire prologue was cut from the 2-hour and 29-minute version.
Okay, that's smart. It does very little.
Should have been cut from this version too.
It does very little, except we'll talk about it. It establishes some visual metaphors so that there's mirror scenes to what happens in this sequence, but it makes you attend a Harvard commencement ceremony in real time. There's literally 20 minutes of walking to the hall, getting in the hall, getting everybody to settle down and stand in a line, letting the professor guy speak, letting John Hurt speak, and it's all in real time. And we don't know the people. We have no idea who they are at this point or what they're saying, and they're talking in the most sort of flowery, overwrought Harvard speak of the year 1870, and it's kind of impenetrable. Why are we here and what are we supposed to learn?
Full disclosure, you could not pay me to go to my dearest friend's college graduation. Never mind, I paid you with the modern day equivalent of $14 to sit in a movie theater and watch this horse shit. Get the fuck out of my face with this crap. I have no use for this whole sequence at all. You pointed out very astutely that John Hurt, William Hurt's not in this movie.
That's right.
John Hurt, he is just, I know all the words he's saying individually. They all make sense to me like that. When you put them all together, it means nothing to me. And then there's just this uproarious applause and fervor around his speech. And I'm like, I have no idea what the fuck he was talking about. And I don't care enough to go figure it out.
He makes a long speech. I tried to figure it out a little bit with the benefit of subtitles on the second pass. I'm like, there's got to be something here that they're trying to convey with the scene. And the main part of it that's actually irritating is he's doing this long speech, and then he goes into this part where it turns into rhyming couplets, and the audience is starting to crack up, and you're like, why are you laughing? This isn't funny. This is just nonsense. And he milks the last line of his speech where he actually like stops. He looks around the room. He makes some big eyes. People are starting to crack up. Oh my God, what's the last word he's going to say?
It's going to be fucking crazy.
And it's just a word that rhymes with the word at the end of the line before, and it didn't add any clarity. And the whole audience goes nuts. They fucking go nutballs for this guy's final rhyme. And you're like, fuck. And I think the point that I got from the speech was he's kind of saying, as Harvard people, we studied the law of gravity and we decided that it still works and we're fine with the way things are. And that's maybe supposed to be ironic to the point that the rest of the movie is about these two rich, privileged men from this Harvard upbringing that go out into the West, get into all this fucked up shit and don't really change anything. But I don't know. Does that sound like a stretch?
No, initially I thought the Harvard sequence was supposed to work as a juxtaposition to like the setting we find them in for the rest of the movie, like you said, and maybe to paint them as kind of interlopers or posers in this world. These guys are fucking Harvard scholars. They're not rough and tumble gunmen. But I don't know, the movie seems to really like at least Jim Averill. You could say whether the movie treats Billy Irvine as pathetic or admirable, but Averill, I think it seems to be on his side. And I think this whole sequence exists for the reason you kind of mentioned briefly, which is to set up like a recurring visual motif for the rest of the movie, which recurrence does not equal
meaning,
importance in meaning. Yeah, like it doesn't really ascribe anything to it except to say like the civilized people are savages too. That's what you want to get after. Sure. But that's not the most profound thing in the world. And I didn't need 35 minutes at Oxford, by the way, not even Harvard.
That's what it makes it more disorienting because I'm like, that's not what Harvard looks like, but it does look like jolly old England, which is weird.
Yeah, I think I saw J.R.R. Tolkien riding by in his fucking Judge Doom outfit.
That's right.
From the end of his movie.
The very same lanes. But let's say, just so that we sound cool, let's say what we figured out what maybe these motifs are. Because in this sequence, there's a big waltz scene where the graduating men and some random ladies waltz around in a circle with some very active camera. And that happens later in the movie on a roller rink. So like, there's like two versions of it. The princely scions of New England and later the down-home immigrants of the frontier. We maybe can make some meaning about how those two things happen, or maybe you can just enjoy the, like, hey, it's another spinning around dance scene. We're having fun.
I mean, drawing those kind of parallels is like the Fisher-Price intro to writing shit. But he's very good at directing those sequences, though. Like, they all look awesome. All those big set pieces are really where you see his skill as a director.
There's great music and there's great camera movement. Camera moves impossibly. It just keeps spinning around and you get dizzy, but you're like, oh, this is kind of amazing. Like, he should have been doing musicals. Some of his talent was wasted for not doing
I think that's maybe why he was so good as a commercial director.
Yeah.
You need to grab somebody's attention in 30 seconds to a minute. Fancy camera tricks are a good way. And he does a lot of long takes in the movie too. And in his other movies as well. He was not like a guy who did a lot of cuts.
Yeah.
So it's a really impressively shot movie. It looks gorgeous. Let's get that out of the way. The landscapes and everything are mind blowing. I'm going to Kalispell in a couple of weeks. So this movie made me even more excited.
Neat.
Go check it out.
That is exciting. Bring your roller skates because apparently they're into that.
I don't know. I'm going to be like Jeff Bridges if I get on my roller skates, just puking everywhere. But
let me make one more conclusion. The parallel that I didn't pick up until later was after this waltz, there's this weird Harvard ritual where the underclassmen surround this tree in this courtyard that's got some like ribbons tied up to the middle of it. And then the graduating seniors come marching in and they have to fight their way through the underclassmen, like physically punch them and kick them and step over them to try to climb this tree and pull a ribbon or a bouquet off it. So there's this like circular fight, and the end of the movie ends with some very circular fights with some circled wagons and some horses riding around in circles. So I'm like, that's another one of those parallels. I don't know. I could bring some meaning to it. Like, this is a fight amongst people with nothing at stake but grabbing a ribbon, and then these other people are fighting for their lives and their future of the country.
Yeah, I think that tracks as a parallel Cimino would have tried to make, but it's real scaring the hose behavior from these Harvard grads. And the dates of these graduates are just like watching them admirably from a window for what seems like hours.
The sun goes down in the middle of this scene. It's daytime. They're waltzing. Then they're up in the windows again. The courtyard has been cleared out. And then it's nighttime and they're still in the window. And it's just a 19-year-old girl making Google eyes at 43-year-old Kris Kristofferson. And the whole thing is unsettling.
43-year-old Kris Kristofferson looks way too much like 53-year-old Jeff Bridges to be in a movie with Jeff Bridges in it. Because Jeff Bridges was a younger man at this time. He's younger than Kris Kristofferson by a score of years.
Right.
And but he doesn't look like Jeff Bridges in this movie to me. He looks like fucking Clancy Brown, honestly. That's the vibe I got from him.
He looks weird. He looks rough. And I think of Jeff Bridges as just a strikingly handsome, charming-faced actor. And in this movie, he plays this kind of sad sack of a guy. And I'm like, that's quite an achievement. They made Jeff Bridges unattractive.
Yeah, he's 13 years younger than Kris Kristofferson.
Okay.
Jeff Bridges is 73 right now.
Cimino had a type, I guess. He cast like two of his...
Mickey Rourke.
Two of his guys. A lot of dudes pop up in this movie.
A lot of dudes.
We'll have to...
Willem Dafoe made his film debut in this movie.
Oh, shit. I didn't even see him.
He had a bigger part, but he laughed when they were doing a setup, and Cimino was so mad he cut his lines and fired.
Oh, wow.
But he's still credited in the movie because he's in the background of some scenes, but I don't think he has any lines anymore.
I forgot to look for him. That's cool. There's a lot of dudes. We'll try to catch them as they pop up.
Name that dude.
So yeah, let's move the story along. As much as Cimino was not in any hurry to do so, Averill gets to Casper. And like you said, it looks amazing. Not only the natural stuff, but they built this fucking town. They had to resize the streets here and there, but it looks amazing. There's so much period specific detail. It does really feel engrossing to be in this town.
Yeah, when he's in like the local haberdashery, I guess, / gun shop.
Yeah.
It is so like packed and busy. Like I was getting anxious just at home watching it. Like I would never shop here. What is this, like Saturday afternoon at Costco? Like you can't go on a weekday?
You can't. No, it was uncomfortable in there. And I didn't get that was one of the clues that he was picking up, that like, why are all these dudes buying dusters and rifles? And it's like, oh, those are the henchmen. Those are the mercenaries that are gearing up for war against the immigrants.
I'll take 48 ski masks and 48 rifles, 500 bullets each. Got some work to do. But yeah, apparently it was just as easy to get a gun in Wyoming in 1890 as it is now.
Yeah.
You just walk up and say, I want this gun. He goes, okay. He just gives it to you. I don't even think he paid for it.
Yeah, no, they're all trying them out. The store, in the street outside.
But it's, like the town is just very well constructed. And I wonder if any of it's left. Did they tear it all down?
There's this one big building, because Casper is shown as a little bit bigger city. And then when you get out to Johnson County, it's kind of a small town, Sweetwater. But like Casper has at least one really big building, and it's got like a dozen chimneys coming out of it, and they're all making smoke in the shot. And I'm like, wow, they really invested a lot in making this place look real.
It's astonishing work. That's really where the strength of this movie lies, in the visuals and the attention to detail, and just the immersiveness of the world. And I think that's kind of going to end up being my thesis about the movie, is that Cimino is more of an art major than a film major. He wants to make strikingly beautiful scenes happen and set pieces happen, and the plot and the characters and the dialogue and all that is just a means to an end.
There's snippets where it clicks. Like, he's not bad. I don't think you can say like, oh, he doesn't understand writing at all. Like he puts some good stuff in there, but a lot of it's just bogged down. And then just editing. Like, this is an exciting story about impending doom, and just to drag it out this long with this many slow, heavy emotional scenes worked in, this doesn't seem like a good choice in retrospect.
And like, not to sit here and backseat quarterback Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate, but maybe like they had done some of this world building and then revealed the land barons kind of plot, it would have been better, because you find out that they're plotting this massacre, and then so much time passes before like anything of consequence with it actually happens.
Yes, because they haven't set up the characters, and we'll talk about that. That ended up in what we're calling the second act, is like, okay, now we're finding out who Jim Averill is in Wyoming.
Nate Champion.
And like, oh, he's got a girlfriend, like all these other people. There's this whole life going on that we didn't set up in the first half, because all we set up was the texture, lots and lots of texture, and then this cop story premise, but he kind of solves the mystery really fast. Like, he gets a few clues, and it's turning into like, he's asking the station master, what's going on? Oh, someone was shot. Oh, what's going on? Oh, there's people in town. Okay. Oh, there's men in the store. And then he just basically goes to the source, and you hear the entirety of the plan. It's just kind of
Right.
laid out in front of you. He goes to the club where the Sock Rowers Association hangs out while they're having their meeting where they're announcing exactly what they're doing. Here's our death list, and we've got permission from the governor. You're like, okay, now I know. And then he meets his old buddy Billy Irvine there, the John Hurt character, who basically lays it all out for him. And it's like, okay, mystery part is done.
Yeah, why not slow play that? You know, you can meet the characters and find out more about the world in the course of his investigation. And you know, like, I don't know, I feel like it was just kind of bungled a little bit there.
The scene that really drove home to me that it gave me a bad feeling about this story as a whole is when those two guys meet up. We spent all that time meeting them as Harvard grads. They reunite in this new situation. It's weird. Billy Irvine is like the one reluctant cattle grower. He's nothing like the other guys. He just gets drunk and mouths off with snarky quips. And then the two of them reunite and it's the slowest, weirdest scene. They're playing pool together.
Neither of them in a rush to finish the game, though. Like, one guy takes a shot and then he takes a sip from a flask and wanders around a little bit. He touches like a candle, and the other, nobody has any urgency in this movie.
They stare at each other for a while. They break out in laughter for no reason. It's like all this excess sentimentality between these two guys. It feels like the wrap up of a movie where it's all finally the old friends meet and it's all this emotion pouring out. But like, hey, we didn't earn that. We barely met those guys in that first scene. And now we thought we were just getting the clues to an exciting mystery and this scary adventure where this mob was going to be descending on a town. But they treat it like this really maudlin wrap up. And I'm like, I don't like these characters. I was pissed that the sheriff hero was this mopey drunk who kind of mumbled all his lines. And it's like, oh, he's reuniting with his old buddy, who's even more of a drunk. They're like, they both have the same characters traits, except the other guy talks louder. It's like this atmosphere of jaded negativity that the characters bring into this movie. I'm like, Cimino's bringing me down with this stuff. I want a fun cowboy action movie.
Not to mention, and look, I don't want to harp on this too much because this was just kind of a fact of life in this era of filmmaking. We didn't have de-aging software and the makeup we have now. But at least Kristofferson, like, his hair was dyed gray and he grew a beard for the scenes that happen in Johnson County. But John Hurt's been supposed to be living this like hard drinking lifestyle for the past 20 years, and he looks exactly the same as he did when he was giving the speech at graduation.
Yeah, he's the same dude. He's pickled on all the gin he's drinking day in and out.
All right. Was there anything else from this section we had to go over, or should we get into the middle part?
I think we harped on it enough. We can hear what happens next.
More like fiddled on it enough.
Uh-oh.
That's another instrument. All right. Now home in Johnson County, Jim Averill goes to see his sweetheart Ella, played by Isabelle Huppert, a local madam who runs a little bordello out of her house. And I do mean little. This house is tiny. Jim brings her a gift of a fine horse and carriage, and they have a fun date night at the town's dance hall roller rink, a place called Heaven's Gate. But it turns out Ella is also dating a gunslinger named Nate Champion, played by Christopher Walken, who works as an enforcer for the cattlemen. Nate can't afford to lavish Ella with expensive gifts like Jim, but unlike Jim, Nate has actually asked Ella to marry him. Now she's having a hard time deciding which man to commit to. Averill gets his hands on the death list and finds out Ella is on it. He tries to convince her to leave town, and he argues that Nate is a dick for not telling her sooner. But still, Ella goes to Nate's cabin where he continues to try to win her hand in marriage. Nate shows her that he put up wallpaper to make it homey, and Ella seems genuinely impressed. But she still won't reveal her decision. Meanwhile, trouble approaches as a train carrying the cattlemen and their mercenaries arrives in Johnson County. They cut the telegraph cables back to Casper and kill the station agent who tries to ride ahead and warn Averill. Some of the cabins in this movie, I think, are actually TARDISes.
Because they're so much bigger on the inside.
It'll look like a 140 square foot stone cabin, like single room cabin. And then you get in and there's like staircases, several rooms, open floor plans.
Yeah, for all the time he spends with establishing shots and giving you atmosphere, they never take a good shot of Ella's compound. Like, it kind of evolves on you. He goes into this little shack and then all of a sudden, you're right, there's like a whole other wing and there's an upstairs and there's a bunch of people living there that you didn't know were there.
I was quite confused by the way this worked out, but whatever. Again, that's not really paramount to the enjoyment of the film. It's just like an odd choice for someone who was so attentive in every other aspect.
You do ask questions as you go through this movie, is like, what was I supposed to know? And some of those things are, like we said, because of the audio and the way that the characters like to be sullen and mumble. And then there's things like this where like, whoa, okay, it's an hour or whatever in this movie. We just learned that the hero has a girlfriend. Maybe that's his wife. We don't understand right away. We find out later that's meaningful, the distinction. And then it's like, oh, she just lives in a cabin and they have a whole scene together. They have sex. She's very horny.
Super horned up. Yeah.
But they're horny for each other. It's fun. Like this guy who we thought was just a mopey sad sack actually has this really energetic relationship with his girlfriend, and they're super into each other. It's a new side of this guy. And you're like, oh, this is really interesting. And then a bunch of other half-naked women come out of the house. And you're like, wait a minute, she's a madam? This is a brothel? Turns out it is.
Yeah, not set up terribly well. A lot of the criticism around this movie when it was first released was about Isabelle Huppert's performance, and I don't really get that. I think she's pretty charming in this movie.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought that. She was very effective, I thought.
She sells the kind of internal struggle she has between Nate and Jim pretty well, I think. It could be frustrating for the viewer, but I get the sense that was kind of by design. And she's like a very accomplished actor, but hasn't done a ton of English language stuff. I think that was part of the hesitation about her, is that, oh, this is going to be such a huge movie and you're casting like this unknown European actress as the co-lead. But I think it was a smart choice because she's very winning.
She is. And also a nice choice because so much of this movie, one of the main themes is there's all these recent European immigrants, their clash with these cattle barons. And a lot of the European immigrants are played by American actors. And so
you don't say.
It's nice to have at least this one played by somebody whose accent is real. And when she says stuff in French, it's like, oh, that sounds like a French speaker.
And she's also just like super hot in this movie. Let's just be honest.
Yeah. And Cimino thought so. He spent a lot of time just checking her out. She's bathing in the river for 5 minutes in the middle of one scene just because she can.
Love them redheads. Yeah. So that sets up kind of, I guess it depends on your point of view. Is this the A plot or the B plot? Is the love triangle the A plot and the pending invasion the B plot, or vice versa?
That's a great question. And the movie's like, I have room for both of them to be the A plot. And we're like, yeah, you could have picked one.
Could have picked one. Could have honed in on it. I think a romance set to the backdrop of the impending invasion sounds too much like Pearl Harbor to be good, but it's not Pearl Harbor the event, Pearl Harbor the movie too.
But it's kind of the best part of the movie.
It's the most well done. It has the most emotional stakes, and it features, I think, 3 characters we actually get to know and kind of care about.
And it occupies the movie between the 1 hour mark and the intermission around 2 hours. So it's like there's a movie in there that is a love triangle that's really good. And we should talk about Christopher Walken as Nate Champion, who's another confusing character because when you see him at first, he's a boogeyman.
He's a fucking Terminator, yeah.
Yeah, he shows up in a shadow, blows a guy away through a hanging sheet with a shotgun and walks away.
Cool scene.
Yeah, there's a hole in this hanging sheet and you see the dramatic Tetons through it. It's quite something visually. But then you find out in the middle of the movie, again, to your surprise, oh, this is a real character with depth. He's actually charming. He's not just a straight bad guy who's sort of an adversary, if not really the villain. They're actually friends, and it's a very complex relationship that you kind of don't see coming, but it's great when it happens.
Yeah, thruples were not so popular in 1890 Wyoming, but they're trying to make it work.
Ella really wants to make it work as a throuple. Neither of the guys is really happy about that.
Yeah.
It's kind of like she's just playing them because they're like, when are you going to make your decision? And without saying it, she's like, guys, I'm not making a decision. I'm just hanging out with both of you when the time is right for each.
She probably could have listened to Jim, though, and left for a little while. Might have been a good call, not to spoil anything. But let's keep talking about Walken a little bit, because Christopher Walken in 1980 is just a serious actor with no publicly known eccentricities. And it's so refreshing. He's playing a character, but he's not doing a character.
That's
you know
right.
what I mean?
No, it's a great moment in his career. And we talk about this with other actors. Like, he definitely was nowhere near becoming a caricature of himself. And so when he plays like cute and charming boyfriend, it's real. He's just a guy who's like trying to impress this lady, and he's being cute sometimes, even though he's already been a ruthless killer. But it works great. He pulls it off very impressively.
And the Natalie Wood situation hadn't happened yet. That would be 1981. Okay. So that wasn't kind of casting a shadow over his career at the time. But he was fresh off The Deer Hunter, which was an all-time great performance.
Okay, yeah.
The Deer Hunter is, I think I might like Heaven's Gate more than The Deer Hunter, actually. But it's probably worth watching just for De Niro and Walken. And
I meant to watch it. I have to fess up. I never saw The Deer Hunter. I saw parts of it on TV as a child, censored for network television.
You saw The Deer Hunter as a child?
Yeah, it was a big deal movie, and they put it on network TV, whatever, 2 years later, but censored all to shit. And it was late. I was probably supposed to be in bed by the time shit started going down. So I have like images of it, but I never watched the whole movie.
Speaking of, you watched The Deer Hunter as a kid, let's talk about the violence in Heaven's Gate a little bit, because I wanted to touch on how much more visceral and kind of upsetting the violence is than what you typically see in Westerns. I've always found Western on violence a little cartoonish, unless you're talking about something like Bone Tomahawk. The violence is kind of the point there. But like when Nate Champion shoots that guy through the sheet, he doesn't just like go, ugh, and like collapse. Like his guts are hanging out. You know, like Cimino wanted to drive home the brutality of frontier violence. It does give the movie a little more weight than it would have had otherwise.
Yeah, it escalates from these individual things. There's a guy who gets punched on the street and then he's dead when you see him in the next scene. Like Averill tries to save this immigrant who's being beat up by some guys and his wife straps him to the top of their cart. He's still alive. And the next time you see him, he's just died. You're like, okay, there's some real grit to the consequences of violence in this movie. And then they ramp up to cabins being assaulted in hails of fire and bullets. And it just gets bigger from there.
There's some really gruesome moments like in the third act involving the bordello.
Yes. Yeah,
Sure
they drive that home and it's rough.
Yeah.
But it's well done. I mean, Cimino, we're sort of doubting his capacity as a dramatist and reducing him to a painter.
Dramaturologist, I think, as Jeremy Strong would say.
But he's able to convey these violent sequences in a way that feels very compelling.
Well, I hope these violent delights have a peaceful and happy end. I think that's how the saying goes.
Probably. We'll look that up later.
Yeah. Let's talk about Heaven's Gate itself, not the movie, but the place, the roller rink.
Another reveal. After I've been somewhere and I was trying to figure out what's going on, only after this roller rink dance scene do they pull out and show you the sign on the side outside. And you're like, oh, that's the point where you tap your date on the shoulder and go, that's the Heaven's Gate. And it was. And it's another fun dancing in a circle scene, like we said. This time led by Jon Drake, the fiddle-playing roller skating kid.
He fiddles quite a bit in this movie. The music is well done. The choreography is well done.
Yeah.
It's a great set. Were you a roller skater in your day? Did you
Not at
go
all,
to the rink?
No, we had roller rinks because I grew up in a bygone era, but
Hey. It's not that bygone because I grew up with roller rinks too.
Okay, cool.
No, we had one trip every year. We would go to Skates USA, I think it was called. It was a roller rink on Long Island. So they'd load up our school from Queens and we'd drive out to Long Island and go roller skate all day.
Oh, dang. That's cool.
And it was the best day of the year. Like everyone looked forward to it so
Wow.
much. If you couldn't go to Skates USA because you had too many detentions or you didn't get the permission slip signed, it was like the worst.
Oh, man. Did that ever happen to you?
I was not very good at getting my mom to sign permission slips and stuff. Like, not because I was like scared. I just was terrible ADHD, I guess. And I just would always forget. So there was one time where I didn't have my permission slip signed. I had to stay at school for the whole day.
What a terrible lesson learned.
Yeah, never again. But I wonder, there's no way Skating USA is still there. Hold on, let me, Skates USA. United Skates of America. I wonder if that was what it was always called. They changed it. But either way, it's in Seaford, Long Island. So if any of our listeners are from Long Island, go check it out.
That's neat. It seems like the people of the town of Sweetwater in Johnson County kind of grew up the way you did. Like you see the kid circling around the floor and he's doing his fiddling and his dancing. And then it's everybody else's turn. And like, oh shit, this whole town can roll bounce. They're like fucking doing moves and shit.
Yeah, except for Jeff Bridges. He makes himself a little nauseous, but he's probably also super drunk.
He's super drunk. He's still sipping whiskey to wash down the taste of vomit as Averill's trying to put him in the back of his wagon.
And Jeff Bridges is not a small man either. You could see Kris Kristofferson struggling with his dead weight. Pretty funny.
Yeah, it's almost a surreal scene. And this is something I think people debate about what happens in the scene because it's a big town party, right? Like we're now just experiencing the pure joy of these farmers out on the range who are also roller skating enthusiasts, listening to this great Zydeco band, which, side note, does not belong in Wyoming in 1890 because that music didn't quite exist at the time. And if it did, it was quite a long ways away in New Orleans. But anyway, they're having a grand old time. Averill drags his buddy, Bridges, outside. The character's name is also Bridges, convenient for me to remember. And then he steps back inside. The band is still there. And the 175 town people have vanished. It's an empty room.
Yeah.
And it's just him and his girlfriend skating around. I'm like, is this a dream sequence? Or is this supposed to have really happened? Or what did we miss?
Yeah, it's a confusing scene. I literally just pulled the scene up to watch one more time to try to get some clarity on it. And my conclusion is that we're seeing the way that they feel, not the way that things actually are.
Yeah.
You know, it's a common saying, just be like, felt like we're the only two people there when you're really like in tune with somebody. And that's kind of the vibe I got from what they were trying to accomplish with that.
I like that. And I just remembered Blast's own callback. Spike Lee did the same thing in Summer of Sam with Leguizamo and his girl on the floor.
Mira Sorvino, yeah.
Yeah, Mira Sorvino. Everybody disappears in that dance scene too. And it's fun.
And I think we came to the same conclusion in that movie. They're like, yeah, we like this. Pretty cool.
Yeah, kind of nice.
We are the most astute film analysts of our time. I
Thank
think
you.
it has to be said. So let's talk about this cabin. cabin again.
Yeah.
Only to say that we meet some more dudes here.
Yeah.
Let's talk some dudes. Who'd you spot in this movie?
Dudes pop up. I'm like, I know that weird trapper dude because he's like a weird character actor and everything. His name is Jeffrey Lewis. You probably can come up with places you've seen him or memorable roles.
I'm trying to.
Didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Give me a minute.
Jeffrey Lewis is a face.
He's definitely a face, yeah.
Yeah, as Trapper Fred, even though his face is almost totally blackened with soot and dirt in this, because the story is that he's been out in the hills trapping wolves for months and he's only just come in this very day.
What a career. Probably the thing I know him from best was he played Roy in The Devil's Rejects, which is for our horror movie fans, quite an effective horror movie from Rob Zombie. Probably his best movie by a mile. And then who's the other guy?
The other guy's a young up-and-comer named Mickey Rourke.
I wonder how his career turned out. I bet he didn't do anything weird or crazy.
He's so young in this, and he plays Nick, who inexplicably lives in Nate's cabin. Like, we know that the Trapper Fred just popped in, and Nick's like, oh, Nate, Trapper Fred showed up. I said he could stay here tonight. But it's like, why do you live in there? It's a one-room cabin, and this guy's trying to impress his girlfriend. What are all these dudes doing here?
I think that's the cabin that Jeff Bridges ended up buying, too. He still has it. It's just his cabin in Montana that he goes and visits sometimes.
Oh, that's neat. So as a memento of the movie, he's like, I got to have that cabin. But they fucking burned it down. I
don't know if he...
movie magic, I guess.
If he wanted it for a memento of the movie, he probably was just like, Montana's pretty cool. He seems like a guy who likes to sit in the middle of nowhere and strum an acoustic guitar for a few days.
That's true. I'm picturing him doing that under the Brooklyn Bridge in R.I.P.D.
Oh, boy.
We wish he wouldn't at that particular time.
Singing about skull fucking.
That's right.
I'm not being crass. That's what he's singing about.
Go back. We have a whole episode on that.
IRPD. I'd rather get punched in the dick than watch that movie again.
Back when we had jokes, folks.
Yeah, we had pre-written bits.
Desk bits.
Now we just wing it, put our index cards in the garbage. I think we're about done with this section, but you have a note here that I need to touch on because I had a very similar thought. When Nate and Jim are reuniting, Jim is, saying he disagrees with the fact that they're going to murder all these civilians. Nate says, and I quote, "You're starting to sound like a man with a paper asshole, Jim." And then they just never touch on that, never explain what that means.
No, that was a real shocker. It was like a good dramatic scene of these two men that you're like, oh, these are the big adversaries. And now they're having this serious confrontation. And Jeff Bridges is behind the bar. He's like getting the rifle out. He's like, oh, is it going to turn violent? And then it's like the old paper asshole put down. It's a great way to end an argument.
His paper's just not very elastic. Maybe you can't, like it's wide open. Why? What does that have to do with?
Yeah, let's think about this. Because there's another quote that I wrote down. See, later Jim tells the mayor, you look like a man about to shit a pumpkin. So there's a theme in these old
that I kind of get because it looks like you're trying to force. Yeah, like
he's sweating. He's not feeling great. Is that the same theme? Like guy with the paper asshole, what would he do? He would probably hold his shit in because he didn't want to tear it. I don't know.
Okay, I found a Reddit thread that's asking the same question. Somebody's grandfather used to say this all the time and he never understood what it meant.
Oh, wow.
Could be like you're full of shit or you talk a lot of shit because if you have a paper ass, you would never be able to stop the shit from flowing out.
Okay. Wow.
I'm not fully satisfied with that explanation. I don't think we've quite cracked it yet. I don't know that we're ever going to get any clarity.
You don't want to crack a paper asshole. Nothing good will come of that.
Come out of that. All right. You ready to walk us through the ending?
Yeah. Let's take it home. As Canton and the cattlemen's forces close in, Averill attends a town meeting at Heaven's Gate, reads out the names on the death list, and sends all the residents into a panic. Ella returns home to find some mercenaries lying in wait for her. The men have already killed her girls, and they begin to assault Ella, until Jim arrives and kills 3 of the men and drives the last one off. Nate shows up right after and pursues the escaped rapist to Canton's camp and kills that man there. A short time later, knowing that Nate is no longer on their side, Canton and his men ambush Nate at his cabin and kill him in a hail of bullets. Back in town, the mayor is considering surrendering to the stock growers, but the main group of locals decides to go out and try to fight the mercenary army instead. On horseback and in wagons, they encircle the mercenaries in a field, and both sides take losses in a ferocious firefight until the immigrant forces withdraw and regroup. That night, Averill joins the settlers and helps them build rolling wooden battlements, and in the morning they attack the cattlemen's positions with dynamite and almost overrun them. But Canton has gone for help, and the U.S. cavalry arrives just in time to stop the battle, effectively rescuing the bad guys. Short time later, Ella and Averill are packing up to leave town together for good when Canton ambushes them. Averill shoots Canton, but not before Ella has been shot, and she dies in Jim's arms. 10 years later, we see Jim Averill back in New England aboard his own luxury motor yacht as he reflects on his life and what might have been. I think.
Yeah, that's the vibe I got.
We don't really know what he's thinking because he literally says nothing in that scene.
No, but he's with his college sweetheart again, I think.
Yes. I think if we can put that together from the clues, I think she's the one in the photo that we've seen that he had with him in Wyoming. I think they were married the whole time. That was the reason he couldn't propose to Ella.
You fucking rapscallion Jim Averill. You down dirty dog.
But what was he doing in Wyoming the whole time if he had a wife back in Rhode Island?
He had to go make his fortune.
No,
he was already rich.
He was already rich and he was working.
I think he was going looking for adventure.
Could be that.
Why did rich people go out west? To get more rich, but he wanted to be a sheriff. Well, he was part of the Stock Growers Association originally. He could have moved out there to be a cattleman and then changed his mind.
No, that makes sense because they do talk about when Canton sees him, he's like, I thought we kicked you out of here. You're not welcome here anymore. And it's like, oh yeah, he used to be one of them. So yeah, maybe he and Billy went out there to do the cattle thing. He got disillusioned, decided to just get a job locally.
Yeah, why not go back to New England at that point though? I don't know. This movie's big on ideas, short on details.
Or there's more details in there than I knew, as usually happens with rewatches. I picked up on a few things and I go, oh, that guy's that guy. Like the guy that Nate Champion roughs up earlier in the movie for talking shit about Ella is one of the rapists who comes and attacks her later. There's a bunch of weird connections.
Isn't Brad Dourif in one of these scenes too?
Brad Dourif is
he the guy who beats the shit out of the first guy?
No, he's the nice guy. He's one of the townspeople with the glasses.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, he's a good guy in this, but he's credited pretty high when the end credits roll. He's like 6. He's like credited above Isabelle Huppert and some other famous names.
Oh yeah, he's Mr. Eggleston. I had no idea.
Yeah, he doesn't say shit until 2.5 hours in the movie, and then he gets one speech.
He's way overbilled in this movie.
But he must have been, I guess, coming off of Cuckoo's Nest, and I don't know what else he was in early on in his career. He was in that, right?
He was in Cuckoo's Nest, yeah. Great actor.
Great actor, and still doing great Western stuff. How many decades later in Deadwood? What a great career in the Old West.
Still playing Chucky.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's got that cash cow to fall back on.
Good for him.
I'm honestly shocked he was never in Justified. He seems like a Justified guy.
Yeah, he totally could have been. Oh, you know who else does pop up amongst the horrible rapists is our old friend Tom Noonan. Did you recognize him?
No, Tom Noonan's in there?
Yeah, he's one of the terrible, creepy guys. He's the guy who like sticks the rifle up her skirt.
I mean, that sounds like Tom Noonan. Oh, boy.
Yeah, he's terrible in this.
That's a gross scene.
It's a disturbing scene. Like you said, that's one where they really push it and make you sit through some very painful stuff.
Not just the rape, which is bad enough on its own, but like you can tell the way that the other girls died was not like, even though they're already dead when we see them, you get the vibe that it wasn't. They didn't show up and shoot them and leave.
Yeah, they were not killed in their sleep. It was a violent, horrible scene.
But yeah, Tom Noonan, if I was casting creepy weirdos.
Yeah.
Especially in 1980 when Barry Keoghan was not even a glimmer in his daddy's eye.
Oh, man. There's very much a Barry Keoghan moment in this, in that Richard Mazer, who's another character actor who's a very familiar face, is doing a fucking strip. It's like note for note, Barry Keoghan, like he could have switched from talking to Jim Averill about, and the cattlemen are coming into town and that's the end of that dream. Like it was like the exact same voice. So kudos to Mazer for like pulling off the same accent that the real Irish guy did decades later.
I guess that's high praise because I don't know enough about the accent to say with any authority whether he was doing a good job or not.
Yeah, that was my only reference. I'm like, sounds like Barry Keoghan. That must be good.
Since we're just naming dudes, did you also catch Terry O'Quinn?
Yes.
Our boy John Locke. Yeah. It's always weird seeing him with hair popping up and stuff, but he's in here and he's Terry O'Quinn, all right.
Yeah, he's very convincing as the cavalry captain who has to kind of stay neutral. He ends up helping Jim Averill out by letting him see the list. He doesn't really balk at it, but I got to do what the governor tells me.
I mean, shutting down the battle was objectively the right call.
Yeah.
But there was clearly an aggressor. Someone should have been punished for what went down.
Yeah. And then it's like wagons riding around in circles, man. And I was like, is this a real tactic? The villagers rush out to attack the mercenaries and they actually kind of catch them off guard, right? Like they didn't expect this big wave of horses and wagons and carts to come charging at them. So they circle them up. And then like the villagers, instead of sort of trying to take good shots at them, they just drive around them as fast as they fucking can. They kind of don't hit anybody because they're driving too fast. They're like riding balls out.
Yep. I'm not sure where this tactic originated, who taught it, but it's visually interesting at least.
It's dramatic.
I don't know if Sun Tzu would agree with it.
Not art, he would probably say. But then the wagons all start flipping. It's fun action for the filmmaker because he went all out and like...
Not for the horses.
No, it's not. It's now that you say that, they were criticized for exactly that stuff where they did some cruelty to the horses and doing these
4
stunts.
horses died in this sequence. One, I think, actually was blown up by dynamite and the shot makes it in the movie.
Oh, fuck.
I'm lucky I didn't really spot it.
Yeah,
at any
me
point,
too.
But
Thank you for
pretty
not
upsetting.
telling me that before I saw it.
Yeah, because even though your brain knows you don't want to see it, you can't help but kind of scan for it at the time.
Sorry, we told our listeners, if anyone watches it, close your eyes when the dynamite starts going.
By the time the dynamite starts throwing, they would have forgotten their name, everything, because they'll have dementia.
It's
so fucking long.
It's super long, and each of those battle scenes goes on really long. I think the battles start to ramp up in the final hour of the movie. And
yeah, it's the final hour is essentially one big battle and then a breather and then another big battle, which is why like on the rewatch, I just kind of fast forwarded through those big battles to like the talking scenes.
Yeah.
It's like they're visually interesting and fun to watch, like we said, but at the end of the day, I'm a grown up with kids and responsibilities. Shit, I can't watch a 4-hour movie twice in 1 week.
Yeah. And one of the dramatic scenes that happens right towards the end, the quiet moments in and around the battles, is we said that Nate got gunned down at his cabin. While he was inside holding up, he scribbled this note. And you kind of see, I didn't really pick up on it until second watch, but one of the contrasts between the two suitors, between Jim and Nate, is Jim is Harvard educated, and Nate is kind of teaching himself to write. So like earlier on, he's like working in this little notebook and his handwriting is like a school child, like it really looks like a little kid's writing, but he manages to scribble this note to Ella saying, I hope she's safe and I wish you guys well. I'm not going to make it. And that scene was, especially when I watched it the second time, is so fucking sad to see this man, this stone cold killer, knowing he's about to go to his death, handwrite this little note that looks like a child's note with this touching message. Like, it was kind of good. That was one of the good dramatic moments.
It was. Do you think when he wrote his name and he wrote champion, he dotted the I with a little smiley face?
If you look close, some of his words are all caps accidentally, and some of his letters are backwards like a kid. And then he signs it Nathan D. Champion. It's very childlike and sad.
But I feel like that's a good choice. Like you said, it drives home the difference between Jim and Nate. And it also just feels like kind of a fact of life for that part of the world, that point in time.
Yeah. If you have the patience to absorb little things like that, there are a few like really touching and cool moments.
Yeah, that's all I've got for this section. If you had anything else you wanted to bring up.
I don't know. Did we talk enough about the final scene? It's very jarring.
Oh, yeah. We should touch on that a little bit more. When we see Jim and his college sweetheart in this mostly silent sequence, or in completely silent sequence at the end of the movie, right?
She has one line, which is, I'd like a cigarette, Jim. And that's it. And he gives her one and he lights it. And then he goes back up on deck. And there's this full on Great Gatsby vibes for me in this, because it's like this rich man. And I mean,
he's rich as fuck. Like,
yeah,
this boat is no joke.
It's this really cool boat. I guess they sourced like an actual historic boat, because it's like this big luxury yacht, but it's a motor yacht, but it's got a big chimney bellowing coal smoke because it's powered by coal. I don't know. Did they do that with luxury yachts? Apparently they did.
I don't fucking know. My luxury yacht experience is severely wanting.
And he's in this, again, I don't know what you call it, like white pants and spats and bow tie and dinner jacket, kind of like this super swanky New England rich guy combo, but so melancholy. I mean, the dude's been fucked up and jaded and melancholy the whole time. And now we know that his girlfriend died. He had to go back to New England, marry this. I don't know why you would be sad about marrying that nice girl that he married, but
she watched him punch underclassmen from a window for 3 hours
and was stoked about it. Yeah.
She deserves the world. Yeah.
Yeah.
She seems wonderful.
That's a keeper right there. But yeah, he's kind of staring out over the water in a Gatsby-esque way. And it's really weird because this movie had plenty of themes. Michael Cimino, I'm talking to you from Beyond the Grave. There was plenty of themes inside the story. And he invented this part. The real life character who he's named after was just a rancher, didn't necessarily have any of these blue blood New England connections. But so he invented this whole other theme about what does it mean if you're a rich patrician man who like decides to go to the Old West, forms a life, witnesses all this horrible carnage, is totally disillusioned about the U.S., loses his girlfriend who he passionately loves, and then is forced to return to his meaningless rich guy life. And it's just a lot to stuff into the bookends of this really big movie.
But I see what you mean about the Gatsby vibes. We're supposed to like, isn't being rich the worst?
That's the danger. I was like, is that what he's trying to say? Oh, it's hard to be rich, guys. It's not easy. Don't wish for it.
That's Heaven's Gate. We did it.
Yeah. Let's close the gate, skate on out of here.
We made it. Let's talk a little bit about Michael Cimino, because his career after this did not go great. I think that's not a surprise to most listeners, because if you win Best Picture in your second film ever and then really never do anything of note again.
It's the absence of being able to name other Michael Cimino movies on into the 80s is like, oh, I wonder what happened.
You might be able to name The Deer Hunter. If you're really into film, you could probably name Heaven's Gate. End of list.
Yep.
So he did not stop making movies, though. He just stopped making movies that people wanted to see.
Oh.
His next one was was Year of the Dragon, which came out in 1985, which was co-written by Oliver Stone.
Oh, wow.
no,
Was that Michael Douglas?
Look at you. Hold on. It was... Mickey Rourke.
Mickey Rourke.
Once again.
There you go. There's the Cimino Rourke connection.
Yeah, they did work together a few more times, which we'll get into. But
okay.
So he was once again criticized for his portrayal of Chinese Americans.
Oh.
He'd already been criticized for his portrayal of the Vietnamese in The Deer Hunter. So he seemed to have a problem with Asian stereotypes and kind of. But it was a commercial and critical failure yet again. And then he would direct an adaptation of a Mario Puzo novel, The Sicilian, in 1987.
Oh, wow.
That had worked out well for one of his contemporaries, Francis Ford Coppola, with The Godfather, obviously. But The Sicilian was a little better received than Year of the Dragon, but was still a flop. I think part of the issue might have been casting Christopher Lambert and Terrence Stamp as like the two main characters in a movie called The Sicilian.
Ooh, yeah. Interesting choice.
Interesting choice.
I was like intrigued. I'm like, I'm going to have to watch that now because I flash back and I'm like, I read the Godfather book back in the day. And then I think I went on and read The Sicilian because I'm like, oh, I like this Mario Puzo guy. I don't remember anything about it, but I'm like, oh, do I want to see those guys playing Sicilians?
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Love Terrence Stamp, star of one of my favorite movies. But Christopher Lambert, I mean, you got John Turturro in there. At least he has an Italian name.
Yes.
Joss Ackland played a Don Massino. Come on. Terrence Stamp playing Prince Borsa. This is farce as an Italian-American man myself.
I know, but Michael Cimino was an Italian-American, was he not?
He was. So he says.
Okay.
How much can we trust from what Michael Cimino has said? So he'd bomb again with Desperate Hours in 1990. I actually remember hearing about this one. That's another Mickey Rourke, Anthony Hopkins, Mimi Rogers, Kelly Lynch, David Morse, Elias Koteas, like good cast, but cost $18 million, made 2.7.
Oh.
Not a good return. And then his final movie would be 1996's Sun Chaser. And this one's a little more of a true bomb. It had a $31 million budget and it made $21,000 at the box office. $31 million is not a 1996 budget for a straight to video movie. That's a theatrical big budget production movie. And
yeah,
I guess audiences hated it so much, like test audiences. The studio got cold feet and just said it would cost more to distribute it and market it. Let's just fucking bury it. And Mickey Rourke actually said that Cimino snapped at some point during production and was just more erratic than he had been in the past.
Okay.
And then John Seda, who was the co-star of the movie along with Woody Harrelson. So it's not like there was nobodies in this movie. He said that he would show up late under the influence. So he was dealing with some demons at that point in his life, some of which would persist till his death. Wrote a novel called Big Jane, which was supposedly semi-autobiographical, but again, we don't know how much of that we can really trust.
Okay.
He would write a bunch of screenplays. He had a room essentially full of screenplays when he died that were never made. It was Hollywood poison at that point.
We talked about Shyamalan, who picked himself up by his bootstraps after bombing out on some big budget stuff and said, okay, let me go back and make things cheaply again, and sort of rebooted his career that way, worked his way back up the chain. Maybe that's what Cimino had done in between Heaven's Gate and Sun Chaser, but then he got just an extravagant budget and couldn't deliver a movie that anybody wanted to see.
Just to give people some more specifics about his various fabrications, he lied about his birth year constantly. No one is 100% sure how old he was when he died. He claimed he made documentary movies before trying to make it in Hollywood, and he was working towards a doctorate at Yale. There was no record of him ever making a documentary, and he had done no work towards a doctorate. Yeah, like he would often say he had no family, no brothers. He had two brothers that he was estranged from mostly. He would make up lies about coming up tough on the streets of New York. Westbury is a very pleasant suburb of Long Island. So he was just known as a teller of tales, let's say.
Okay.
So there was also stories which were detailed in this biography, which is great, by the way. It's called Cimino, The Deer Hunter, Heaven's Gate, and the Price of a Vision. And maybe we'll put a link to it in the show notes, just in case people want to check it out. So the writer uncovered a wig seller and cosmetologist named Valerie Driscoll, who frequently met with Cimino in the early 90s. And Cimino was going by the name Nikki during these sessions. So he used she, her pronouns. He never publicly expressed any wish to be referred to by she, her pronouns, so I'm not sure what the right course of action is when you're making a podcast about them. There was certainly not a lot of transgender or gender fluid directors represented in Hollywood during the height of Cimino's fame. So if he had feelings that he was trans and truly was a woman, it makes sense that he would only indulge them in private when he thought he was safe. But it just leads to it, like between the fabrications about his early life and career and this desire to be somebody else, there seems to be kind of an identity crisis at play with him.
Yeah, a very interesting and somewhat tortured weird figure.
But he was incredibly heartened by people's rediscovering of Heaven's Gate late in life. He would attend lots of screenings. Like if you were having a screening of Heaven's Gate in your backyard, if you called Michael Cimino, he might show up just to be like, yes, isn't my movie grand? Like,
oh, that's charming. That's kind of makes him into a sweetheart. Just like Nate Champion went from scary gunslinger to sweetheart in the middle of this movie. So did Cimino.
The famously reclusive Michael Cimino was like all of a sudden, no, I'll come out of my house. Yeah, you want to talk about how great I am? Wouldn't you know it, when he was giving, Q&As and speeches, he would often go over time, like egregiously, and refuse to get off stage. So some things never change.
No.
Let's talk about Kristofferson a little bit, see what he got up to after this.
Okay.
Oh, actually, I have one more fun Cimino story. This one's more of a cheeky story, not quite a tragic one. It also is vaguely Trumpian, and I'll see if you can make that connection. So apparently, before filming, Cimino bought the land that they were going to film on for some scenes. Not the ones in the state park, obviously, I don't think, but some other scenes. And United Artists was being charged exorbitant fees to rent the land for the shooting days.
Oh.
When they checked the records, they were paying Michael Cimino to rent the land for his own movie.
Oh, that is tricksy.
Right?
That is a very sneaky move.
He saw the cookie jar lid was open and he was like, I'm going to take them to town.
Which is funny because this wasn't a movie that was budget constrained. They tried to rein him in apparently, but they started out by giving him the blank checks. You feel differently for scrappy directors who have to get creative and how to wheedle some extra money to pay the bills and get their movies made. But this was like a guy was kind of cashing in.
Yeah. If he was taking that money and like paying the gaffers for their overtime because the studio wouldn't, then yeah, sure, go for it, Robin Hood.
Yeah.
But I doubt that was the case somehow. So Kristofferson, he was already a seasoned screen vet and also a pretty A-list movie star because he had pretty recently been in A Star is Born, the 1976 version, which was a big hit.
Right. Okay.
And then he would star in the first theatrical film produced by HBO in 1984, Flashpoint, which I've heard of, but I've never seen, but it was a bomb. So maybe we can talk about it if we want some more Kristofferson in our life someday.
It's neat.
His movie career was kind of on a downslope throughout the 1980s. You could blame it on Heaven's Gate, but he was starting to show up in, let's call it schlock, some more schlocky stuff. He was in some bombs critically and commercially, and he started getting less and less prestigious parts. And then he kind of was more of a musician, I think, for most of my life.
Right.
Then he was a big time country singer, but then he popped back up in Blade as Whistler. And that was the role that defined him for a generation of people like my age, because the Blade movies were very important to us. We talked a lot about them on the Drop Zone episode. So that was kind of where I knew him from. And I was like, cool. And now he's retired because he's 86, but he's been in some stuff after Blade. It seems like his career got a bit of a boost. He was in The Jacket with Adrian Brody, Fast Food Nation. He's just not that into you. And the Dolphin Tale movies. Can you picture Kristofferson in the Dolphin Tale movie?
I don't even know the Dolphin Tale movies. So the answer is no, I cannot.
Well, they're called Dolphin Tale and Dolphin Tale 2. So you can imagine they're not exactly the most gritty neo-noir type stuff.
Doesn't sound like it.
He's just chilling now. He still makes music once in a while. But Christopher Walken, I feel like we don't need to catch people up too much on him. But he went straight from this to stuff like The Dogs of War, Pennies from Heaven, View to a Kill. He was the original Puss in Boots.
Oh, neat. I didn't remember that.
Neither did I. We talked about him in Wayne's World too, but since then he's been in Severance. And was just recently announced to be cast in Dune Part 2.
Oh, yeah, that's neat.
I'm really interested to see him. And that feels like a more serious role than we've seen him in recently.
Yes.
Do you know who he's playing?
No, I don't. I'm interested to hear who he's playing.
Oh, shit. He's playing Emperor Shaddam IV.
Oh, okay.
Did I say that correctly?
That's as good as I could say it.
All right.
Didn't the Emperor show up in the first Dune? Played by somebody else?
Let's see. No, I guess he didn't. He was mentioned, but yeah, maybe he didn't appear.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess I forgot.
Yeah, and neither did the Princess
Irulan?
Irulan, because that's going to be Lawrence.
Yeah, those will be some really fun new additions.
Yeah, so that feels like a cool change of pace. Like we said, he's been doing a lot of silly roles lately. But from what I understand, Severance, though ostensibly a comedy, is also pretty dark and fucked up. So I haven't seen him in that yet, but I assume.
Yeah, same here. I started it, but I guess I haven't got to him.
Same. John Hurt. Let's talk about him. Not William Hurt.
No.
Although he is also sadly passed. But John Hurt passed in 2017. He had a tremendously prestigious career, but once again, people of my generation will reduce him to a supporting role in a comic book movie because he was Professor Broom in Hellboy and Hellboy the Golden Army.
Oh, nice. Okay. I didn't remember that.
Great performance. I loved him in that. He's very charming, very kind of grandfatherly. Grand paternal? Is that a thing you can say about somebody?
I will allow you to say it.
All right. He was grand paternal. He worked steadily, though, up until his death. He was in stuff like Jackie, the Natalie Portman, Jackie Onassis biopic.
Oh, really? Okay.
He was in Snowpiercer, the movie, not the show.
Okay.
And Only Lovers Left Alive. He was still making big studio projects.
Yeah, seriously.
And then Isabelle Huppert, this was her American film debut, and she really didn't act in very many English language films after, but she'd been in a few. 1994's Amateur. She was in 2004's I Heart Huckabees.
Oh, okay.
Which is the movie with the famous shouting match between David O. Russell and Lily Tomlin.
Oh, okay.
It goes without saying, fuck David O. Russell at every chance we get to say it.
Yeah, I don't know much about him except that. Okay.
Sucks. But he made Three Kings and the Fighter, 2 movies I enjoy. So
okay.
But fuck him. He's made more movies than that I enjoy, but those 2 are very special to me.
Right.
She would star in Paul Verhoeven's Elle in 2016, and she would win several Best Actress awards for including Independent Spirit Award, Golden Globes, and New York Film Critics Award. And she would even be nominated for Best Actress, not Best Actress in an International Feature.
Oh, nice.
Which is a big accolade for a foreign language movie. Really interesting. She also received rave reviews for her performance in 2016's Things to Come, and she's still at it. She's got 5 movies set to be released this year.
Damn.
So didn't slow her down, not being in America. This movie was only released in America. They had a worldwide release planned, but that obviously got nipped in the bud after the performance initially.
I'm glad to know that she's had such a good career because she hasn't been on my radar until I watched this movie.
Yeah, that's everything I've got. Did you have any final words about Heaven's Gate?
No. If I could roller skate, this is the point where I would start to just gently skate backwards into the distance and put this movie, I was going to say put this movie behind me, but the movie would be in front of me at that point.
Like Doug McRae says in The Town, you're supposed to be able to skate backwards. Good life lesson there. But this was super exciting. We made it to 100. Thank you, everyone, for having enough interest to keep us going.
Thanks for keeping us afloat. It's been a joy. It feels like nothing. It kind of feels like they just went by. We'll check in at the next 100, I guess.
Next week, we're going to be doing a fun one that I've been wanting to cover for a while. And it ties in nicely to the Barbie movie we're all talking about. It's Birds of Prey. The Harley Quinn film that is just oodles of fun. So I'm excited to hear your thoughts on it.
It's one that I've seen and I remember liking it, but I'm looking forward to revisiting it. That'll be really fun.
Yeah.
And topical.
Exactly. And I did want to take a little bit of time before I get into my usual spiel to thank a listener who sent a very fantastic email this week. Javi, we read it. I sent it to not only Ian, but also my wife, my mom, everyone who would be proud of me reading those words. So we super appreciate you. And if you want to send us any other emails, our email address is blastzonepod@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter @blastzonepod. Send us movie recommendations, feedback, suggestions for the show, bits we should bring back, bits we should not bring back.
Or just nice things. I can't tell you how much that little letter buoyed me, lifted my spirits, made it all worthwhile what we do here.
Absolutely. And thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next time in the Blast Zone.
See you next time in the Blast Zone.
The Blast Zone.